Yeah, that's important, not to be afraid of confusion. There's an old saying that confusion and paradox guard the gates of the truth. Confusion and paradox guard the gates of the truth. And if you're going to learn, what you have to be interested in is what you don't understand, if you're going to learn. And you've got to be able to be with it. You've got to be able to be with it. In other words, if you have a reaction to it, in terms of it should be understandable. This is how people react, Oh, I don't like that book. It's not understandable. The writer didn't make it easy to read. The writer didn't make it understandable. Well, that may be true if you're talking about fiction or something like that, but we're talking about the truth here, right? And so if you understand the truth, if you understand the nature of the truth is inherently non-conceptual. The truth is non-conceptual. So even if you think you understand, what you understand isn't it. That's not it. The truth is an experiential reality. What we're talking about understanding are what's called pointers. When you listen to teachers teach, the conceptual information they're giving you are pointing to the truth. The concepts themselves are not the truth. They're pointing to the truth. They always say don't confuse the finger pointing at the moon with the moon. The finger's pointing at the moon. What is the moon? The truth can't be spoken. It can't be spoken. However, you are that. You are that truth. What you are, the awareness that is your nature, right, cannot be spoken, it cannot be understood, it cannot be conceptualized. The reality of it is, I don't know what this is. Does anybody here know what consciousness is? No, that's why the most accurate statement you can make is, I don't know. That's the most accurate statement you can make, about you, about your true nature, is that I don't know what this is. But even though I don't know what this is in terms of turning it into something I can speak about, I'm experiencing it all the time. This is something that if you kind of catch it, right? If you really look at awareness, if you really look at what you are, it's an amazing, incomprehensible reality that you are. It's an amazing, incomprehensible reality. And we're trying, through the practice of meditation and through these teachings, what we're doing is we're trying to back out of this, in terms of, when you were a baby, you were in a natural state, right? And then things started to get added, right? Your name, your personality, your appearance, what you have, what your role is in life, all that jazz, right? That all gets added to it, right? And through these practices and these teachings, we're trying to back out of that, to back out of it, to be present in such a way where we're aware of awareness itself. Awareness is aware of itself. Awareness is aware of itself, right? That's the only possibility. Nothing else can be aware of it, and it can't be aware of anything else. Awareness is aware of itself. That's what we mean when we say you can't know what you are in terms of a concept. You can't talk about it. You can't know what you are. But you can be what you are, and that experience is the knowledge of what you are. It's non-conceptual, but you are knowing what you are. If you pay attention to awareness, which is always available because it's never not there, it's always available all the time, 24/7, right? If you pay attention to it, this is what we mean by resting as awareness. When the mind is upset, or when the mind is confused, or when the mind's in some kind of turmoil, right? which it will be, right? Isn't it? Which it will be, right? Because the mind is a comparing operation, right? It's always comparing. It's always, this is what's happening, right? And my mind is interpreting what it is. We give everything all the meaning it has. Everything means nothing, really. The mind gives meaning to everything all the time, right? So we're taking the raw material that's coming in through what's happening, and the mind interprets it based on your conditioning, right? That's why all of us have a different experience of what's happening, because your mind's interpreting it based on your unique conditioning. So it occurs to you to be different than it occurs to me and every other human being, right? But that which we are is the same for all of us. That which we are is the same for all of us. So what we're talking about when we say rest as awareness, what we're saying is, instead of paying attention to the mind, see the habit pattern, the addiction that we have, right, through practicing over the years, right? Don't forget, remember, before you ever heard about any of this, you were the thinker of your thoughts, weren't you? For sure. Yeah, you were the thinker of your thoughts, and when you were the thinker of your thoughts for you were the truth, weren't they? Yeah, and when you look at that now, you can see how not true that is. It's not true. So that's why I say it's very important to practice paying attention to your mental condition consistently. Develop the habit of paying attention to the mental activity consistently. Paying attention to what thoughts are occurring in your mind, what feelings are arising in your mind, what physical sensations are arising in your mind, paying attention to that all the time. So when it goes off the rails, you can see it instead of identify with it and be upset. Right there's a difference. You can see it instead of identify with it and be upset. And because you can see it instead of identify with it and be upset, right? That you can be present, you can be available to reality, you can be available to the world, you can be available to what's happening, right? Instead of having to think about it. If you're thinking about it, are you really present to what's happening? No. You're in your own mind. And this is the condition that almost all of humanity's in. And almost all of humanity's living in an internal thought world. Not in the world. Not in the world, right? That's why life is not very exciting for most people, right? How exciting is it to just live in your mind? Live all day long with what you think about everything that's happening instead of experiencing what's happening. Just experiencing life happening. And if you experience life happening without the thought process that's interpreting it all the time, when it goes up, and when it goes down, because it will, won't it? Right? When it goes up and goes down, it's not a problem. But if you're interpreting it through a mental interpretation, it's only, you only like certain parts of it. You only agree with certain parts of it. And the rest of it you disagree with, and you resist, and you reject. And as my Zen teacher says, anything you resist or reject, you give the power to disturb you. So if you're walking around being disturbed a lot, you have rejected what's happening. When you're upset, you've rejected what's happening, haven't you? Yeah. So what if you weren't rejecting what's happening? How would that be different if you weren't rejecting what's happening? If you could practice being present in such a way that you're not living your life in your mind, right? And you're available to experience what's happening. And because you're available to experience what's happening and you're not judging and evaluating it all the time, which is what the mind does, right? Then you can see it more clearly and you can respond to it more effectively.
You don't have to get upset over it.
There's nothing to get upset about.
Yeah.
It's just what's happening. Right? But if it's just what's happening and it shouldn't be happening, right? Then it's like, oh, I can't accept that. I can't accept that. I have to do something about that. I have to resist it. I have to get away from it, you know. That's why one of the things about this stuff that's going around now about resistance, right? You got to be careful with that, right? Because what you resist, yeah. You see the danger? You see the danger? You can just take a stand for the truth. You don't have to resist anything. You know, that's what Jesus Christ did. He got him crucified. Yeah, but he was just saying, you know, I'm just going to tell the truth. No matter what, I'm just going to tell the truth. Right? It just happened to be the truth was so unpopular at that time that they had to get rid of him. Right? But if you're going to live a life worth living, right? Or do you want to live a life as a highly opinionated person that has a lot of resistance and rejection of a lot of what's happening around you all the time? That's no fun, you know? And that will end you up being depressed. That will end you up being angry. That will end you up being fearful. That will end you up being anxious, right? That will end you up being a mental health case, right? Yeah, so your conditioning is a setup for being anxious and being annoyed or being angry or being fearful. That's why it plays in your mind that way. Your conditioning is a setup for that, right? Because we learned as children certain things are good and certain things are bad. Certain things are right, certain things are wrong. You learn that, right? And it's different depending on, you know, what your indoctrination, what your conditioning was. It's different depending on what country you lived in. It's different depending on who your parents were, right? So that's undependable. That's not dependable. You know, it's not a dependable way to respond to the world, to respond to life. But if you can pay attention to the mental activity and see it for what it is, if you can pay attention to it and see it for what it is, and see that the conditioning is constantly setting you up for being upset because it generates expectations that are unrealistic, right? The source of upset is unfulfilled expectations or thwarted intentions. Whenever you're upset, if you look, you'll see you had an expectation that wasn't met. That's why you're upset. That's what you mean when you say this is wrong. It should be different, right? I expected it to be different. When I woke up this morning, I expected the sun to be shining and it was raining and I'm upset. Right? So if you pay attention to your mind, you can see that activity doing that way. And if you pay attention to your mind and you see that activity doing it that way, and you're practicing resting as awareness for brief moments as often as possible, right? Each time you do that, you're escaping from that condition. Every time you do that, you're escaping from that condition. If you're upset about anything, if you have upsetting thoughts about the past or the future, which is mostly what the upsetting thoughts are from, right? The past or the future? If you're, which isn't happening, right? So you're being upset about something that's not happening, right? If you're upset about the past or the future, or even if you're upset about something that's happening now, right? And you're aware enough, you're attending enough, you're paying attention enough to notice it, right? And if you understand these teachings, right, as soon as you notice that you're experiencing restlessness or anxiety or fear or anger, if at that moment, right, you shift your attention away from the thought activity and begin to experience yourself as awareness, the awareness can be aware of the body breathing, or the awareness can just be awareness itself. And if you actually do that, there's no way you can maintain the upset. Because if you're not thinking about it, it disappears, doesn't it? Yeah. So that practice is the practice that will give you freedom. And if you practice it consistently enough, you'll spend enough time outside of the conditioned mind to experience well-being. Well, first of all, when you say we end up dying, right, that's not what the teaching says. The teaching says you don't die. Now, I know you don't believe that because you've been conditioned to believe you're your body. It's as simple as that, right? So when they say you crave death, another way of saying it, and I've said that here in the past, is you crave relief from you. Don't you?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
So relief from you would be death. And that's what that statement means that Ramana Maharshi was supposed to have said when he said, the absence of you will be the most glorious experience you ever have. Because without you there's nobody to suffer. Without you, there's nobody to have negative thoughts. Without you there, there's nobody to want things that you don't have. Without you there is no mental activity that's constantly misinterpreting things in a way that's upsetting for you. That's all that means, that you crave death. Now, I understand what you're saying, right? Because in the ordinary conditioned way that we experience ourselves, right? The last thing we want to do is not be here. So look at the conundrum. The last thing that you want to do is not be here, and yet not being here is the answer to all your problems. Because when you talk about death, the death that we're talking about is the death that we're talking. See, this will allow this to work for you. The death what we're talking about is the death of something that doesn't exist. That's the death. The death you fear is the death of who you take yourself to be, isn't it? Well, who you take yourself to be isn't real. It doesn't exist. And that death is the easiest death. That death can happen at any time. That's the easiest possible death that could exist, right? Because what do you have to do to get out of something you're not in?
Stop thinking about it.
See, but that's the problem. The reality of it here is to experience your true nature. There's nothing that you have to do because you already are experiencing your true nature, right? But your mind will not tell you that. Your mind will tell you that you're not. Won't it? And when it tells you that you're not, the next thing is going to be, well, then what do I have to do? I must have to do something. I must have to change something, right? Maybe if I meditate more. See, that's one of the things about this that's confusing for a lot of people because they associate meditation with self-realization. They're not related. Meditation and self-realization are not related. Meditation, the only purpose of meditation is to relax the body and allow the mind to calm down. Right? Why? Because if the body's relaxed enough and the mind's calmed down enough, right, you could see the obvious. You can't see the obvious if you're thinking about it. If you're thinking about it, you're turning the obvious into something that you think it is instead of what it is. So that's when you're practicing meditation, you're practicing not doing anything, aren't you? Mm-hmm. Yeah, the instruction for meditation is to be. Now watch, the instruction for meditation is to sit there and be. Right? How do you do that?
Not thinking.
Follow your breath.
You can't, there is no answer to that question, how you do that. You know why?
Because you already are.
Because you already are sitting there being.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, but see what your mind does with it? Your mind turns it into something that has to change. Right? That's the habit. The habit is, this can't be it. This can't, see, and the reason that we think it can't be it is because we're referring to the mental condition. This can't be it because what I take myself to be isn't what I am. See it? This can't be it because what I take myself to be isn't what I am. But that's not the way it occurs. So you don't think about it in terms of what I take myself to be. No. The thoughts that are occurring in your mind are already what you take yourself to be in the form of thinking. They're already what you take yourself to be in the form of thoughts. Right? So how do you get out of that? You have to practice moving your attention away from that mental activity again and again and again. And if you move your attention away from that mental activity and there's no thinking happening, right? There's no thinking happening, what can be wrong? Nothing. And if nothing's happening, it means that you're not there. If nothing's happening, it means that you're not there. When you move your attention away from thinking, you disappear. You disappear. And the experience of this disappearance is very satisfying. Because once you're not there, everything that was wrong isn't wrong. Once you're not there, everything you were afraid of, you're not afraid of. Once you're not there. That's why my Zen teacher says when he was in the ER dying, right, all he had to do was pay attention to his breath so he wouldn't get involved with thinking, and he was fine. He was peaceful. And tears ran down his cheeks because he was experience how grateful he was for having heard this truth, for having learned to practice this so he could not suffer. And he had done it consistently long enough over time that even death itself was not a problem. He could just relax. Not only could he relax because he could focus his attention away from the thought process, right? But he could relax because he learned the truth, which is death isn't real and doesn't exist. He learned that truth, and that truth became a conviction. You understand? We can talk about the fact that death isn't real, that it doesn't happen, the body dies, right? Right? But what you are is not in form. You know, what you are is not the body. What you are doesn't have a beginning. All you have to do is look at the awareness. You could do it right now. If you look at the awareness, you can't find a beginning to it, can you? Yeah. So there's no evidence of any beginning, and anything that doesn't begin can't possibly end. So it's just happening. It's happening. It's happening in the eternal now. So through the teachings and through the discussions with the teacher and the teachings, you can be convinced that the truth is that death isn't real, right? Will that make a difference? It won't make any difference. If we have a conversation and at the end of the conversation you're absolutely convinced that it's true that death isn't real, right? Are you still going to be afraid to die? Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Even if that conviction relieves you of a lot of your existential fear, right? Fear will still be there when the time comes. You know why?
Thinking never stops. Thinking never stops. It's just, you just don't want to.
Well, you could move your attention away from the thought process when you're dying and the fear will still be there. You know why?
No.
Because your brain and your nervous system are designed to survive. And a threat to survival uses fear as energy to get away. You get it? So it's a system. Your nervous system is a system, right? So it's not about not being afraid. It's not about there not being fear. This is very important to get. It's not about there not being fear. It's about not being afraid of being afraid. You get it? It's about not being afraid of being afraid. Fear is going to happen. It's just part of the setup. It's part of the system, right? But when it happens, will you be scared because you're afraid? That's the question. If the fear happens and you understand that it's inevitable, right? What do? You feel it. That's all. It's just a feeling. Doesn't mean anything. It's just a feeling. It's just the energetic activity of your nervous system. That's all it is. It's just a feeling. When the autonomic nervous system comes into balance, it means that the sympathetic aspect of it has quieted down so that the parasympathetic aspect of it can do its job, which is in a balanced state all the time. It's just the natural state, a balanced state all the time. And that's what you're monitoring if you're paying attention. That's why I say you're paying attention all the time. Richie Davidson, in a video that I saved and I send to all of my clients, where he's talking about the brain research, and he gets into talking about what they discovered in terms of the network in the brain that is the default network, right? The default network, the network that you go into when your thinking is not being used for practical purposes. You automatically go into the me network, thinking about everything as it relates to me, right? But before he got into talking about the details of the research, he said that William James, who is considered to be the father of psychology, made a statement in his book, famous book about psychology, that attention itself is the most important human quality. Attention itself is the most important human quality. Okay. What are you paying attention to? Right? What are you paying attention to? What are we doing in meditation? Moving attention, right? So attention is the most important quality. If you notice that your mind's in a crazy modality, right? And you move your attention away from it, guess what? It's no longer having any effect on you because you're not involved with it. Over time, one of the things they say about what changes through practice is you lose interest in your involvement with thinking. You lose interest in it because you realize that it's not what it was cooked up to be. It's not as important as people think it is. Because attention, if you understand the way things work, you realize that when you think you know, now watch, this is a very important thing. If you see things as they are, what you see is that when you think you know something, and you think you know it because you were thinking about it, it's the awareness that knows it all the time, not the thinking. Awareness knows. I often say, when you walk into a room, do you have to stop and say, okay, that's the ceiling, that's the floor, that's the door? You don't have to learn the room. The awareness knows it immediately when it looks at it, doesn't it? Yeah. So if you understand that, you understand that you can trust awareness 100%. But thinking, you can't trust thinking. Thinking will use your conditioning to tell you that something is happening that's not happening. Right? Look at your relationship to other people. They behave in a certain way, right? You interpret the behavior according to your conditioning, and you get angry, and then when you talk to them about it, they don't know what you're talking about. They don't know what you're talking about. And if you're pissed off enough, you don't care that they don't know what you're talking about. You insist that they do, and they won't own up to it. Right? That's how crazy it gets. That's how crazy it gets. But when you understand the truth, your relationships can begin to work because you're more interested in being with the person than you're interested in thinking about what's happening. You're more interested in experiencing the person in terms of their true nature instead of relating to their personality. Look at the difference that can make if the way you relate to everybody you come in contact with, you're relating to who they really are instead of who they think they are or who you think they are. That's a whole different relationship, isn't it? Yeah. That's why my Zen teacher says if you want to practice the truth, go around during your day and relate to everybody as if they're you. And treat them the way you want to be treated. Yeah, thinking is very powerful and very useful, but it's also very limited. It's also very limited. Trust me when I tell you, you don't know whether you're afraid of dying until you're dying. Yeah, because dying is just a conceptual reality to you right now.
Yeah.
But if you're dying, it's not a conceptual reality anymore.
So I'll start to get afraid when I start to die.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
But see, here's the thing. When that fear arises, right, the question will be, can you be with the fear with an understanding that it's natural? It's just your nervous system.
Yeah.
Yeah? Or is the way you relate to the fear like, oh my God, it's the end, you know? Same thing with all your emotions, you know, be with your anger, don't be angry.
Yeah.
Be with your fear, don't be afraid, you know? Be with your depression, don't be depressed. Be with your anxiety, don't be anxious. That's where the freedom is. If you know your true nature, right, what you are as awareness can be aware of anything and not be it. Which means that any mental state, any emotional state that arises, you can be with because you're not identified with it. You're not being it, you're being with it. This is the key to mental health. This is the key to mental health. If you understand this and you're practicing this, when depression comes or anxiety comes or restlessness comes, you can be with it instead of be it. Most people don't know that. They don't know they can be with it because they don't know who they are. They think they're the character that is it instead of their being able to be with it, right? And it causes a lot of suffering. That's why meditation and these practices are a refuge. They're a refuge from the condition that will cause suffering. And if they're understood that way, if you see that for yourself, then you make it your business to practice meditation every single day, formally and informally. You make it your business to pay attention to your mental activity all the time, so you can see what's happening there that you would otherwise identify with and suffer. But if you can see what's happening there and you know yourself to be the awareness of it instead of the mind, and I'm the awareness of what's happening in my mind, I am not what's happening in my mind. That gives you freedom. And when you relate to it that way, whatever comes up there will pass because you won't resist it. You get it? Whatever mental state arises will come and go, and you won't get stuck with it. If you resist it, right, and you reject it, then you become a mental health case. Then instead of experiencing depression, you're depressed, right? Instead of experiencing fear, you're afraid. That's a whole different experience. Whole different experience.